Mark Ryder didn't expect trouble when he bought the old Montgomery parcel. 5 acres of Georgia countryside, wrapped in pine, dotted with crumbling rose bushes and an old garden shed. The land had sat idle for over a decade, tied up in an estate mess until it was quietly released. At a trust sale, Mark and his wife Janelle had fallen in love with the property on first sight, unaware that buying it would ignite a generational grudge with 3 of the most entitled women the county had ever known. It started just 3 days after they moved. Mark was loading mulch onto their front walkway when the first car rolled up. A silver Lincoln with tinted windows. The door swung open with a dramatic creak, and out stepped a woman dressed like she was headed to a political fundraiser. Not a gravel driveway. Pearls. Polished heels. Aviator sunglasses she clearly didn't need on a cloudy day. "Excuse me," she called, already irritated. "What exactly are you doing on my grandmother's land?" Mark blinked, looked around. I live here now. Can I help you?" That's when the second and third cars pulled up behind her. 2 more women emerged, one barking into a phone and the other silently scanning the yard, like she was casing it for a robbery. The silent one held a folded paper map like it came straight out of a 1970s glove box. "I'm Karen Whitmore," the pearl wearer announced. "These are my sisters, Brenda and Delores. And this land," she said, stabbing a red-lacquered nail toward the driveway, "has been in our family for generations." "You're trespassing." Mark set the mulch bag down. "Actually, I bought this place legally last month. Trust sale. Everything's filed at the courthouse." Brenda scoffed. "That trust sale was a sham. Daddy never would have wanted it sold. We had a verbal agreement." Delores finally spoke, quietly. "We're here to reclaim it." Janelle stepped out from the porch, calm, but firm. "This isn't a negotiation. We live here now. We have the deed, the title, and the keys. You're standing on our land." Karen crossed her arms. "Not for long." They left that afternoon, but not before Brenda snapped photos of the mailbox. And Delores took detailed notes about the garden layout. It didn't sit right. And by that evening, Mark knew why. Around 2 a.m., motion lights flared in the backyard. Janelle, half asleep, looked out the window and screamed. Mark grabbed his phone and ran outside. The rose bushes were shredded, stomped, and dug up like someone had tried to bury something or unbury it. A garden gnome was beheaded. The next morning, Mark reviewed their newly installed trail camera footage. Sure enough, all 3 sisters had shown up in dark clothes around 1:47 a.m. They pried open the fence, dug holes in the flower beds, and Brenda even posed in front of the shed flipping the bird toward the camera. A blurry middle finger that told them exactly how serious these women were about reclaiming what wasn't theirs. Mark filed a police report. Janelle started making phone calls to their real estate attorney. But the sisters didn't stop. They came back in daylight this time, Karen clutching a clipboard and barking at a confused power line technician parked near the easement. "This is our family easement," she yelled. "You're not digging a pole here unless you get approval from the Woodland Acres HOA." The tech looked at her like she'd grown horns. "Lady, this isn't in any HOA." Mark stepped out, phone recording. Karen sneered. "Not officially. But we've got founding documents from 1989. The Woodland Acres covenant still holds weight. And we, my sisters, and I were reinstating the board." That's when Janelle came down the porch steps, holding a manila envelope. "You mean this Woodland Acres HOA," she said, waving the faded, crumpled letter Karen had left in their mailbox the night before. It had been signed by all 3 sisters, printed from a Word doc, and ended with a shaky statement about returning. Neighborhood harmony under Whitmore direction. Fake seal and all. Karen didn't flinch. You'll be hearing from us again. You're on borrowed soil. As their cars peeled off down the gravel road, Janelle turned to Mark. I think this is just the beginning. And it was, because what the Whitmore sisters didn't know was that Mark had already uncovered something in the county archive, a detail so small it had gone unnoticed for decades. But it would become the single thing that would destroy their entire claim to the land. And that secret, he wasn't sharing it. Yet by sunrise the next morning, Mark and Janelle had a decision to make: either ignore the Whitmore sisters and hope they went away, or go full throttle and get ahead of whatever nonsense they were planning. Janelle chose the second option. Before Mark had even finished his coffee, you don't poke around someone's rose garden at 2 a.m. with a shovel and a clipboard unless you're preparing something worse, she said, flipping open her laptop. Let's figure out what they're up to before they drag us into court or worse. Sure enough, by 10 a.m., an envelope was taped to their mailbox. No postage. No return address. Just one line typed across the front. Notice of infraction. Woodland Acres HOA Compliance Board. Janelle opened it with a knife. Inside was a Fox official letter with a bulleted list of violations. Unauthorized mulch pile near driveway, obstruction of historical rosebeds, non-compliance with heritage soil preservation protocols, fence color inconsistent with neighborhood harmony. At the bottom, it demanded a $325 fine payable to WHCB and gave them 10 days to comply or vacate. Mark couldn't even finish reading it without laughing. Heritage soil preservation protocols? Is that just a fancy way of saying don't touch our dead grandma's bushes? Janelle didn't laugh. This is a trap. If we respond, we're legitimizing it. But if we ignore it, they'll escalate. Mark nodded slowly. Let's escalate first. He drove straight to the county clerk's office with a copy of the notice. The clerk, a no-nonsense woman named Paula who'd seen her fair share of family land feuds, confirmed exactly what they suspected. There was a Woodland Acres HOA, she said. It dissolved in 1993. No board. No dues. No power. It hasn't been reinstated. And if it had, y'all would have been notified in writing before purchase. Mark leaned forward. So what happens if someone tries to impersonate an HOA president? Paula didn't blink. That's a fraud charge waiting to happen. Armed with that, Mark returned home ready to play a little offense. But he wasn't fast enough. By the time he got back, a crowd had gathered near the edge of their yard. Karen, Brenda, and Delores were standing with clipboards, handing out community petitions to neighbors walking dogs or jogging by. The front of the flyer read, "Save our land. Defend Woodland Acres from unlawful development." One neighbor, clearly confused, asked, "Isn't this the couple who just bought the Montgomery place?" Karen's voice shot back. "Bought. With forged deeds. This land never should have been sold. We're just restoring what's right." Brenda chimed in, practically foaming. "They've already destroyed the last standing rose arbor, and the irrigation trench they're digging. It's draining directly into sacred soil." Janelle walked up, calm but firm. "Actually, that trench is legally approved, and it's draining rainwater that would otherwise flood the backyard." Delores stepped forward, holding a faded black and white photo of their grandmother planting roses in the 1950s. "This soil carries legacy, spirit. That back fence line runs straight through her memorial garden. You should have known better." Mark joined his wife and raised his voice just enough to carry. "You know what else carries spirit? The truth. And here's a fact for everyone watching. This land was foreclosed and legally sold at a county mana. Get trust sale. The HOA these women are talking about. It hasn't existed for over 30 years. A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Karen's jaw clenched. We'll see what the real county has to say about that. They left in a huff again, but not before Brenda tripped over their sprinkler head and loudly claimed she was injured on stolen ground. That evening, Janelle found something disturbing while browsing the neighborhood Facebook group. Karen had posted a scanned version of the phony HOA infraction notice online, urging neighbors to boycott the Ryders and refuse them access to shared utilities. Comments varied, but a few seemed to buy it. One neighbor wrote, "I knew something felt off about them. Why mulch over a memorial garden?" And then came the kicker. Someone anonymously uploaded drone footage of their backyard, zoomed in on the new flower beds, compost bins, and even their doghouse. The caption read, "What are the Ryders hiding in those piles of mulch, Janelle?" Locked the doors that night. Mark reviewed the footage from the trail cameras again. But this time, he noticed something new, something chilling. In one of the videos from the night the sisters trespassed, Delores wasn't digging in the rows beds. She was bent over by the shed with a shovel and a small steel box. She pulled it out from beneath the dirt, checked its contents, then tucked it under her coat. Mark froze the frame, rewound, zoomed in. The box wasn't theirs. He remembered what the seller had said at closing. That shed's been untouched since 1996. Might be some old junk buried back there. Mark turned to Janelle, heart racing. "They didn't come here to fight over flowers," he whispered. "They're after something buried. And now they'd already taken it." The next morning, Mark stood in the backyard, eyes fixed on the exact spot where Delores had dug up the steel box. The ground was still soft, the mulch slightly disturbed. He paced in slow circles, thinking about the trail cam footage on loop. In his mind, he didn't say it out loud, but something about the way she moved carefully, surgically told him this wasn't a random stunt. That box had been hidden for a reason, and now it was gone. Janelle came out with 2 mugs of coffee. "Could have been anything," she said. "Photos, letters, keys. I mean, maybe it's just sentimental." Mark shook his head. "They wouldn't have risked trespassing and sabotaging our property just to retrieve a showbox of old letters. Delores handled it like it was worth something, like it was valuable." Janelle took a slow sip, watching their yard like it had secrets, waiting to surface. "Then we find out what it was." By noon, Mark was back at the county records office, this time digging through historical property filings connected to the Montgomery estate. He found something he hadn't seen before, a folder titled Woodland Acres Covenant File. It was thick, a little too thick for a defunct HOA. Inside were dozens of handwritten meeting notes from the late 1980s and early 1990s, back when the Whitmore family ran the HOA. And right in the middle, tucked between aging legal memos and expired bylaws, was a document that made Mark's stomach flip. Private family covenant, not for recording. It had no legal stamps, no official record, just 5 signatures. One of them belonged to Eugene Whitmore, Karen's father. The others appeared to be his brothers and their wives. The document was written in pencil and listed parcels of the Montgomery property, with corresponding heir obligations. But the shocking part was a footnote at the bottom, Parcel D, to remain under Whitmore oversight until debts resolved through private collateral. Box remains buried until deed clears. Mark didn't need a law degree to realize what it meant. Back in the day, the Whitmores had used this land as collateral for private debts. That box Delores unearthed, that wasn't just some sentimental family keepsake. It was likely the proof for part of it. A promissory note, a secret lien, even uncashed bond, something the sisters didn't want anyone else to find. And if Mark and Janelle hadn't bought the property, it probably would have stayed buried. He rushed home, copies in hand. "Janelle, was waiting on the porch, pale-faced, holding her phone. "You need to see this," she said. On Facebook, Karen had posted a video shaky, handheld footage of her standing in front of their shed, with a forced smile. "This is the original Montgomery family tool shed," Karen said sweetly, "and it holds generations of legacy. We have filed a motion with the Woodland Acres Covenant Board to preserve this structure and halt illegal renovations by unauthorized occupants." Below it was a caption, "A stolen legacy is still a legacy." The comments were a mix of confused sympathy and wild conspiracy. One neighbor wrote, "If they really are desecrating heritage land, someone needs to stop them." Janelle scrolled further and pointed, "That one's from the same neighbor who invited us to the 4th of July cookout." And then came the last straw. A certified envelope arrived the next day, an official notice from a private arbitration firm. The letter claimed that Karen and her sisters had reinstated the Woodland Acres HOA with full charter authority, and that the Ryders would be summoned to appear for a compliance hearing. "You've got to be kidding me," Mark muttered. "They're trying to hold a fake court." But Janelle wasn't laughing. And what happens when people start believing it's real? They had two choices: either ignore it and risk losing control of the narrative, or hit back with something even bigger. So that night, Mark made one final trip back to the shed. If the sisters believed the land still held secrets, maybe they were right. Armed with a flashlight and a shovel, he started digging behind the shed where the soil looked less compact. Within 10 minutes, he hit something solid, an old cedar box, warped from moisture but still intact. Inside, a stack of fragile, yellowed documents, mortgage receipts, county tax statements, letters of debt forgiveness. And one black envelope labeled, "For the final owner only." He opened it slowly. Inside was a letter from Eugene Whitmore, dated 1994. The last paragraph stopped Mark cold. "To whomever holds this land after my death, my daughters have no claim here. They don't know what I sacrificed to clear our families. Debt. I buried this truth, literally, so they'd never look back. Let the land belong to its rightful owner now." E.W. Mark stood in silence. It was over. Or it should have been, because while he was reading the letter, he missed the faint hum of an island cart just beyond the tree line. Hidden in the dark, watching, waiting. The next morning, Mark could barely focus. The letter from Eugene Whitmore was still sitting on the kitchen table, its edges curling like it had soaked up the decades of tension that birthed it. It wasn't just a personal confession. It was a legal game changer. It said in black ink that the land no longer belonged to the Whitmore sisters and hadn't for decades. The man who signed away the family's rights buried the truth with his own hands, possibly to protect his daughters, or maybe to hide the financial collapse of the family name. Either way, that secret was out now, but it wasn't going to stay buried for long. Mark scanned the yard through the kitchen blinds. The same black sedan from the night before was parked down the road, just visible behind a sycamore tree. Someone was watching their every move. Janelle walked in and saw him. "Still out there?" He nodded. "They know we found something, and they're waiting for us to use it." "Then maybe we should," she said, sliding a flash drive across the counter. I scanned the letter and all the documents from the box, uploaded it to a cloud folder, labeled it Exhibit A. Whitmore, legacy fraud. Mark chuckled grimly. "You're terrifying when you're organized." Just before noon, a knock rattled their front door. This time, it wasn't a fake HOA letter, it was a summons. Karen had officially filed a civil suit with a local magistrate claiming emotional damage, unlawful occupation, and heritage theft. Janelle blinked. Heritage theft, is that even a legal term? Apparently not, because the attached paperwork was riddled with inconsistencies and half-baked legal jargon. But it didn't matter. The date was set. They were being dragged into court in less than 2 weeks. Later that day, the sisters returned, but this time, they brought an audience. Karen showed up wearing a blazer and pearls again, but this time, with a cameraman from some amateur local blog. Brenda and Delores stood flanking her, holding the black and white photo of their grandmother and a printed image of a supposed 1980s Hoa map, complete with red scribbled lines that surprise cut right through the Ryders' house. Mark came out calmly, phone recording. "You're trespassing again." Karen smiled, sickly sweet. "We're simply informing the public. This isn't trespassing, it's a peaceful demonstration on ancestral soil." Brenda turned to the camera. "This land holds our roots. These people are erasing history with their shovels and compost bins." Janelle stepped out beside Mark and held up the real copy of Eugene Whitmore's buried letter. "You want to talk history," she said. "Your father buried this letter with a cedar box, stating that none of you had any rights to this land. He gave it up, sold it to pay off debts. You've been fighting over dirt he already gave away." Delores tried to snatch the letter, but Mark held it high. "You want the truth? We've got it scanned, archived, and backed up 3 different ways. And if you keep pushing this, we'll file a countersuit so deep it'll take your grandchildren to untangle it." Karen's smile faded like spilled ink. "You wouldn't," she hissed. "Try me," Janelle replied. But the sisters weren't done. That night, Mark and Janelle returned from dinner to find their fence smashed in and the garden vandalized. Their compost bins were tipped. The rose bushes once again ripped from the soil, except this time something else was left behind. And Hoa violation notice duct taped to their front door. Only this one was printed on watermarked paper, stamped, and carried what looked like a forged county seal. Janelle looked it over with trembling hands. This looks official. It could fool a judge." It hit them both at the same time. The sisters weren't just relying on family entitlement anymore, they were faking documents that could hold up in court if they weren't stopped. The Ryders could lose their legal footing, all because someone out there didn't know the HOA was dead and buried. The next morning, Mark got a text from Paula, the county clerk. "Need you to come in ASAP. Whitmore sisters filed something shady with zoning office. Don't trust anything you receive in the mail." He showed up with a folder full of scanned evidence. Paula handed him a copy of what the Whitmores filed, a forged amendment stating that any property sold within Woodland Acres must remain under Whitmore family supervision and be subject to their new HOA rules. There was even a fake minute sheet from a community vote that supposedly occurred just weeks before Mark and Janelle bought the house. Mark narrowed his eyes. They're not just pretending anymore. They're building a fake paper trail. Paula leaned in. "Then it's time to hit back. Not just in court but publicly. Let's tear the roots out." Mark's plan was simple. Expose the sisters, reveal the forged HOA takeover, and drop Eugene Whitmore's letter as the final blow. But he didn't know that the Whitmores had one last move coming, and this one would cross a legal line even Karen might regret. Karen always knew how to stir the pot. But this time, she didn't just stir it, she tipped it over and set fire to the kitchen. 2 days after Mark met with the county clerk, the neighborhood's private Facebook group exploded. A video had surfaced. One shot from inside what appeared to be a county records room. In it, a woman with long dark hair, Delores, was flipping through a stack of real estate files, pulling out specific pages and slipping new ones in. The caption read, "When they say history's written by the winners or the Whitmores." It didn't take long before Paula, the clerk, confirmed the worst. The Whitmore sisters had snuck in during a fake appointment with a notary and tampered with county land files. At least 2 public records had been swapped for forged ones. Mark stared at the computer screen. Stunned, they'd just committed a felony and recorded it like it was a TikTok prank. Janelle wasn't laughing. She was already dialing their attorney. But before they could even process it, their front gate buzzed. A deputy stood on the other side with a grim expression. "We received a noise complaint and a violation report," he said. "Came from the Woodland Acres HOA." Mark nearly laughed. "It's not real." The deputy held up a printed form. "Well, someone filed this in person, signed under penalty of perjury, and it includes a claim of ongoing land fraud. I've been instructed to issue a temporary property assessment until we get this sorted." "Wait, what does that mean?" Janelle asked. "It means," the deputy said with a sigh, "that until further notice, any development or construction on this land is frozen." The sisters had gone nuclear dot, and they weren't finished. That night, Janelle awoke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright. Mark was already out of bed. Through the bedroom window, they could see the faint orange glow flickering near the shed. They ran outside in bare feet. The compost bins were on fire. The small garden shed's side panel had been doused in gasoline and lit, though thankfully the flames hadn't spread far. A scorched rag still lay nearby. Mark grabbed the hose while Janelle dialed 911, breathless. The fire department arrived within minutes. They extinguished what little was left. But the arson investigator found something chilling: a handmade cloth, banner soaked in fuel, wrapped around a metal stake. Burnt lettering still faintly read, "You were warned." That night, police opened an investigation. But everyone knew who'd done it, even if no one could prove it just yet. Janelle was quiet as she sat on the porch, hands wrapped around a mug of untouched tea. "They won't stop," she said finally. "Even after the truth. Even after they lost the land, the lawsuit, the lies, they just escalate." Mark nodded. "That's why we're not waiting for court anymore." He turned his laptop toward her. On screen was a public web page titled, "The Whitmore Family Land Fraud Timeline. Verified County Records." Below it were scanned documents, audio clips. The buried letter from Eugene, the HOA dissolution, certificate from 1993, even screenshots of Karen's fake violation letters. Janelle read the bold print at the top. "Sometimes truth needs a bigger megaphone. Here's ours." "I made it public," Mark said. "Every neighbor, every news outlet, every zoning board member, we're sending it to all of them tomorrow." And send it they did. Within hours, the neighborhood Facebook group lit up again, but this time, the tone was different. Comments poured in. "Wait, they forged HOA documents. This makes sense now. Karen tried to find me last year too. I voted to support them. I take it back. These people are unhinged." Even neighbors who had been cautiously neutral began posting apologies. And then came the call. Detective Ashby from the county sheriff's office left a voicemail for Mark. "We need to talk." Someone came forward with more information, and you'll want to hear what they found in Karen's attic. Later that evening, a knock at the door startled them again, but this time, it wasn't another officer or a threat. It was Mrs. Langford, the 82-year-old widow who lived 2 streets down. She held an old manila folder in her shaking hands. "I used to be Eugene's secretary," she said softly, "back before the family lost everything." She handed Mark the folder and smiled through her tears. "He told me once, if they ever tried to reclaim what wasn't theirs, to give this to the rightful owner." Inside the folder was a notarized will amendment, dated and stamped. It explicitly disinherited all 3 Whitmore sisters from any claim to the property. A legal dagger. And the timing couldn't be more perfect because Karen had just filed a motion to seize the shed as a restoration of cultural artifacts. Now, Mark and Janelle held the very document that would obliterate that claim in court. But Karen wasn't done scheming just yet, because just 1 hour later, Mark received an anonymous tip. A screenshot. The sisters had filed a new trust, not just over their father's property, but naming the Ryder home itself as an unauthorized occupation zone. It was the boldest lie yet. The courtroom was packed. It wasn't a high-profile case, not by national standards, but word had spread fast. 3 sisters forging HOA documents, filing false claims, and allegedly setting fire to a backyard compost bin had become the most dramatic scandal the county courthouse had seen in years. Reporters from local blogs lined the back row. Neighbors, who once sided with Karen, now sat silent in the gallery. Others just came for the show. Mark and Janelle sat calmly at the plaintiff's table, a thin folder between them filled with evidence. Across the room sat the Whitmore sisters, Karen stiff as granite, Brenda red-faced and whispering under her breath, and Delores staring daggers at the floor like she could melt it if she concentrated hard enough. Judge Caldwell entered the courtroom and called the case to order. Case 2745, Karen Whitmore, Brenda Whitmore, and Delores Whitmore versus Mark and Janelle Ryder regarding property disputes, violation of historical easements, and wrongful occupation. The judge barely glanced up before speaking again. Let's start by asking one simple question. Is there, or is there not, an active HOA governing this neighborhood? Mark stood. No, Your Honor. It was dissolved in 1993. I have official county documentation, a sworn statement from the clerk's office, and supporting witness testimony to that effect. Caldwell motioned. Present it. Mark handed over a neat stack. The judge read through it, flipping faster as his brow furrowed. Defense, Karen, rose slowly. We submit exhibit a proof of the HOA charter reinstatement and copies of community petitions recognizing the board. She handed over a glossy folder with a fox seal embossed in gold foil. The judge flipped it open, then raised an eyebrow. This seal is fake. And this community vote, all 3 signatures are from you and your sisters. Karen's face tightened. We represent the historical board. The land has legacy weight. And you think that gives you legal weight? No, sir. It gives us moral authority. The judge let the silence hang in the air, then turned to Mark again. Anything else? Mark nodded to the back of the room. The doors opened, and in walked Mrs. Langford, Eugene Whitmore's former secretary, leaning on a cane, but radiating steel under her sweater vest. Karen's eyes widened. Brenda whispered, "What the hell is she doing here?" Mrs. Langford stepped up and took the stand. She spoke slowly, every word heavy with clarity. I worked for Eugene Whitmore from 1982 to 1994. He disbanded the HOA himself after the family ran into severe financial trouble. He sold the land under a trust agreement, not to preserve it but to protect it from seizure. She pulled a document from her purse and handed it to the bailiff. This is a notarized amendment to his will. It explicitly disinherits all 3 daughters from any claim to the land. I was instructed to deliver it if they ever tried to take it back. The courtroom murmured as Judge Caldwell reviewed the document. Karen stood up. That's not real. She's lying. The judge looked up, calm and cold. Ms. Whitmore, sit down or I'll hold you in contempt. Delores leaned toward Karen. You said he never made changes, Brenda added. You said we still had rights. Karen hissed. Shut up. This isn't over. But it was unraveling. Mark rose again. Your Honor, we also have video evidence of Ms. Delores Whitmore tampering with county records. It's already been submitted to the sheriff's office, and we have confirmation of an active investigation. Judge Caldwell's gavel hit the desk. I've seen enough. The HOA does not exist. The land belongs solely to the Ryders. This court dismisses all claims made by the plaintiffs and recommends immediate review for criminal fraud and document tampering. Janelle exhaled deeply, barely able to believe it was over. Karen looked like she might combust from the inside. Her jaw clenched. Her hand gripped the back of her chair like she wanted to throw it. But she didn't make a scene. She just whispered, "You'll regret this." Later, outside the courthouse, Mark and Janelle were surrounded by cameras and mics. "How does it feel to win?" One reporter asked. Mark smiled, tired but satisfied. "Feels like we finally pulled the roots out." But the victory was short-lived. That night, a white envelope was slid under their door. Inside was a printed map. It had no name, no address, just coordinates, and the words, "You may own the deed, but we still own the past." Janelle held the paper in silence. Mark whispered, "They're not done." The map had no labels, no landmarks, just crude hand-drawn lines, a few arrows, and a red X marked over a cluster of GPS coordinates. Janelle plugged the numbers into her phone and stared at the results. "It's still on our land," she murmured, "behind the tree line, past the old fence, near the overgrown ravine." Mark looked over her shoulder. "That's where the property dips down. We've never even been back there. And that was intentional. The undergrowth was so thick back there, even deer avoided it. The only path had long since collapsed under fallen limbs and creeping ivy. The previous owner mentioned it was just swamp runoff and ticks, but clearly, the sisters believed it held something more. That night, they didn't sleep. By morning, they were hiking through tangled brush and mosquitoes, guided only by the GPS ping and a gut feeling that whatever lay beneath that red X wasn't just about land anymore. 20 minutes in, Janelle froze. There it was. An old wooden cross-rotted and barely standing nailed together with rusted screws and almost swallowed by vines. At its base was a moss-covered stone slab. No name, no date, just carved initials, E.W. Eugene Whitmore. Mark whispered. Janelle crouched, brushing dirt and ivy away from the slab's edges. "He's buried here." But Mark shook his head. "No. He's buried at St. Augustine's Cemetery. Public record confirms it." "So what was this?" Suddenly, a twig snapped behind them. They turned. Karen, dressed in all black, eyes glassy, breathing uneven. Brenda and Delores flanked her like shadows, each of them holding flashlights, even though daylight still filtered through the trees. "I see you found it," Karen said, voice as hollow as the woods around them. "You followed us?" Mark snapped, stepping between her and the stone. "We led you here," Delores muttered. "You needed to see it." Janelle stood up slowly. "See what? Exactly, a fake grave." Karen's lips twitched. "Not fake. Symbolic. This is where he buried it." "Buried what?" Mark demanded. Karen stepped forward, tears suddenly welling. His shame. For a moment, she wasn't the venomous woman handing out forged violation notices or throwing fake hoa parties. She was a daughter haunted, angry, broken. "Our father buried the family's wealth out here," she said quietly. "Not in gold or coins, but in blackmail material. Letters, confessions, business contracts that would have destroyed him if they got out. He called it the anchor, said the truth would sink us all." Delores added, "He told me before he died, if someone tried to break up the land, tried to sell it, dig up the anchor first. Make them pay." Brenda nodded. "He was protecting us, even if it meant lying." Mark's mind spun. That box Delores dug up, was that part of it? Karen didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out something from her jacket pocket. A small cassette tape, labeled in fading pen. 1991, for my daughters. She tossed it at Mark's feet. He made one copy, kept it buried here in case the truth came knocking. I took it back, but I'm giving it to you now because this war, it's killing us. Janelle knelt and picked up the tape. Why now? Karen didn't answer. She just turned, shoulders drooping like the wind had gone out of her sails. Brenda and Delores followed her silently, leaving the Ryder couple alone among rotting wood, buried secrets, and generations of lies. Back at the house, Mark dusted off an old cassette deck. He slid the tape in, a hiss, then a voice raspy, and, "Firm Eugene Whitmore, if you're hearing this, I'm likely gone, and the girls have done something foolish. I never wanted the family to crumble over dirt. Land's just land. But people don't forgive theft, even if it's family stealing from family. What I buried out there was the truth. If it surfaces, the Whitmore name might not survive it. But that's not your burden anymore." Mark and Janelle sat in stunned silence as the tape played. The last line was chilling. "To whoever owns that land now, forgive them if you can, but don't trust them. They won't stop until they've either taken everything back or burned it all to the ground." The room felt colder somehow. That night, Mark updated the public site with the recording. The whole truth raw and unedited. They weren't playing defense anymore, but they didn't know that Karen had already taken one final step in her garage. Deep inside a dusty trunk, she held one more envelope. Marked only use if they win. Inside, something that could turn the entire community against the Ryders overnight. And it was already stamped and addressed to every neighbor on the street. The tape had gone viral. Neighbors who once politely nodded at Karen now crossed the street to avoid her. Local papers picked up the story. Fake Hoa scandal rocks woodland acres. A local podcaster even called it the most entertaining land feud in small-town history. But none of that mattered to Karen Whitmore. She wasn't done. And Mark and Janelle didn't even know it yet. That final envelope, it had already been mailed. 2 days later, every single mailbox in Woodland Acres received a crisp manila envelope. Titled, "The Writer's Deed is a Lie," inside was a glossy pamphlet with cherry-picked quotes, blurry scans, and an official-looking letter addressed to all property owners of historical woodland estates. It claimed the writer's title was built on forged trust documents, that Eugene Whitmore's original will had been manipulated, that Mark and Janelle were the real frauds and Karen and her sisters were the victims of a land theft conspiracy. Worse yet, it included a fake email address posing as a county whistleblower, urging neighbors to investigate the truth for themselves and consider a community freeze on utilities until full ownership could be proven. The mailers hit hard by sundown. 2 neighbors had already disconnected shared irrigation lines. Another rolled past in his golf cart yelling, "Property pirates." Janelle stood on the porch gripping the letter. "We won in court. We proved it all." Mark was already dialing their attorney. "Yeah, court isn't where Karen fights. She fights in the shadows, with gossip and cheap ink. But fate had other plans." That same afternoon, a quiet silver car pulled into their driveway. Out stepped a well-dressed man in his 70s, briefcase in hand. "Mr. and Mrs. Ryder," he asked kindly. "My name is Theodore Bain. I'm an executor of Eugene Whitmore's estate. The real one. And I believe I owe you an apology and a very important package." He opened the briefcase right there on their porch. Inside was a worn leather-bound binder with gold-embossed initials. "EW this," he said, "was Eugene's private archive. Locked away in a bank vault since his death. It was only to be opened if anyone ever challenged the estate in court. I just learned it had been triggered by your trial." Mark flipped through the binder, breath-catching. Inside were original notarized deeds, audio transcriptions of Eugene's confessions, and a signed property transfer agreement with a family friend named Harold Montgomery, the same name on the seller's title from when Mark and Janelle bought the land. "This is everything," Janelle whispered. "Undeniable, legally airtight." Theodore nodded. "And there's one more thing." He pulled a smaller envelope from the briefcase. It was addressed to the next owner of my soil. Mark opened it slowly, eyes scanning the short handwritten message. "You now hold what I once failed to protect. I buried my mistakes deep, but you unearthed the truth. If my daughters ever come knocking, show them this. They never wanted the land. They wanted control. Now, take it back and grow something better." Eugene Whitmore. The next morning, Mark printed 50 copies of the real will, stamped by the estate executor. Janelle attached a QR code to the recording of Eugene's tape and sent it to the neighborhood listserv with one line: "The fight is over, and the land has spoken." One by one, neighbors started responding. Some offered apologies. Others brought over pie, fresh mulch, and fence paint. The irrigation lines were reconnected. The whispers stopped. Karen, she didn't show her face again for weeks. But the real twist, 3 weeks later, they received a letter from Brenda, this time without venom. It was handwritten, a little shaky. "I hated you for what I thought you were doing. But after hearing the tape and seeing the truth in his words, I realized we weren't fighting for him. We were fighting for what we wanted him to be. I'm sorry, truly." There was no return address. Just a pressed rose between the pages, dried, fragile, and real. That spring, Janelle planted a new rose arbor along the back fence line. They called it the Forgiven Edge. Neighbors came by to admire it. Some cried. Others just smiled. The land was no longer a battlefield. It was finally home. And as Mark watched the sunset over the property once stained with secrets, he whispered, "We didn't just win this fight, we reclaimed the future."